we need to rebrand? The answer was yes. We knew that this was something that the organization was interested in. It's something they had struggled with for years. When I'm just speaking of people with T1D and their caregivers, 36% had no idea who we were. That was shocking. When you are in this organization, I think there is a belief that everyone knows who we are. The first stat we got, the data proved to us that that was not the case.
What are the factors that kind of come into that name selection?
If we were going to do this, it was going to be a fully data-led process. It was not going to be based on opinion. We needed to make sure that we had the data and we had the backup to prove that this was the right move.
So for those who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about Breakthrough T1D. What do you do?
So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Breakthrough T1D. Part of the reason why I'm talking to you is because we just became Breakthrough T1D on June 4th of this year, June 4th, 2024. Before that, we were JDRF. And before that, we were the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, which is probably the nonprofit that most of us know us for. The name Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. We are the leading global type 1 diabetes research and advocacy organization and have been for over 50 years since we were founded by two mothers who had children with type 1 diabetes. And we are the largest funder of type 1 diabetes research globally. And our advocacy work is incredible to help get type 1 diabetes treatments into the hands of people with T1D.
Now, tell us a little bit, any kind of CMO who has been through a rebrand knows what a tremendous undertaking that is. Tell us a little bit about what motivated that decision and a little bit about the rebrand process for you.
I think that the organization had this on its brain when I was interviewed for the role. I've been here almost 3 years, and when I was being interviewed, I could tell that it was very important to our board and to our leadership that I had 360 marketing experience. And I think that's because they recognized that the name probably wasn't serving them. The reason being is that juvenile diabetes is a medical misnomer. It is not a thing. It is type 1 diabetes. So we knew that this was something that the organization was interested in. It's something they had struggled with for years. But like you just said, that process is a huge undertaking. So what I realized from the get-go when I arrived is that if we were going to do this, it was going to be a fully data-led process. We needed to make sure it was not going to be based on opinion. We needed to make sure that we had the data and we had the backup to prove that this was the right move. So we went through an 18-month process to actually rebrand the organization. And the quantitative and qualitative research we did was in several phases. The first phase, really understanding, do we need to rebrand? And the answer was yes. The second phase, name testing, which was so important. The third phase, testing, we had a new strategy, simplified, less complex from where we were before. So it was easier for people with T1D and their caregivers to understand. And then we also tested the visual identity. So it was a long, rigorous process, but one that I am so proud of, and I know our team is so proud of, because we know this was the right decision. So that was a big part of the process, the data, but also stakeholder management. You know, we have people who've been involved with this organization since its inception, and we made sure that they came along for the ride too and understood why we were making this change, because this is a successful, strong brand, but in a big change that we needed to make sure that the organization was on board with.
Sure. Well, so often I feel as though organizations make the mistake of treating a naming and a branding project as if it's entirely taste driven, right? And really making the decisions based upon kind of a gut feel and really a guess at what the market's going to respond to. So I would be interested to dive a little bit deeper into what is the data that you're gathering? And then as you're doing name selection, what are the factors that kind of come into that name selection? Is this largely SEO driven? Is it driven by, like consumer expectations or stakeholder expectations? Like what, I guess, first, what's the data that's going into this and how do you collect it? Like at a really tactical level, how do you actually gather the data? And then on the other side, like I assume you had a slate of options you were selecting from. What went into that final decision?
Yeah. So I'll break it up for you. So the first thing is, it was really important that for the data that we were capturing this data globally. So to your point about doing this, and your tactical question, we went through a very rigorous RFP process and partnered with Siegel and Gale, who I had actually worked with in the past as our agency. And we did have a research partner to work with, a validated research partner to work with globally. In terms of who we spoke to globally, we spoke to people with type 1 diabetes. And you'll hear me say T1D a lot, which I'll talk a little bit about too. That is the acronym, if you will, for type 1 diabetes that you'll be hearing more and more. But we spoke to people with type 1 diabetes. We spoke to their caregivers, but we also spoke to potential donors. We did that because potential donors, people who have donated to a healthcare charity of some sort, because we really needed to know not only with the people who we thought were very familiar with us, but people who could potentially be interested in our organization and what was going on in the type 1 diabetes community. What did they react to in terms of our name and our approach to how we spoke about ourselves? So we did that research globally across all the countries where we have affiliates. So that was in the UK, in Canada, in the Netherlands, in Israel, Australia, and in the US. What I will tell you is the statistic I use most often, and the thing that was probably most surprising to our community, was that 36% of the people we surveyed globally had no idea who JDRF was, our former name. And that's of people with T1D and their caregivers. So when I'm just speaking about people with T1D and their caregivers, 36% had no idea who we were. That was shocking to our leadership and to our board and to our volunteers, I think, because when you are in this organization, I think there is a belief that everyone knows who we are because of the incredible work we do. And the data, the first stat we got, the data proved to us that that was not the case and that we were not reaching everyone we should. When you dug a little bit deeper into that statistic, what we found was it did not vary much by country. There was a belief that, it'll be much higher in the US. Everybody knows who we are in the US. It did not vary much by country. And the reasons behind it were because a couple reasons. One, people did not understand what the acronym meant. Many years ago, the organization changed to JDRF because they thought the acronym would take away from this juvenile diabetes misnomer, but it didn't. It just was confusing to people because they did not know what the acronym meant. So that was important. That told us, that was the one thing out of the gate that said, okay, we're headed in the right direction before we went into the other research.
One of the things I love that you mentioned there is basically the way in which data is able to break us out of these kind of myopic views of our organization. I think it's easy if you're kind of working in the organization every day to have all these assumptions that seem reasonable based on your limited perspective. But data, when you're gathering it in a really intelligent way, can really break you free from a lot of those assumptions and help you to kind of open your mind to the reality on the ground. You mentioned that you put out an RFP for this process, and one thing I would love to get into a little bit is, you're a former agency person. I'm an agency guy myself. We respond to a lot as agencies, respond to a lot of RFPs, get a lot of RFPs put in front of us, and a lot of them, I suspect you'll agree, are like really bad. Like you'll get the RFP and it's not clear what the potential client wants. It's not clear, exactly how they're going through their decision-making process. Maybe there's a lot of information that's extraneous or requirements that are like, a big lift that pull you away from really getting the information that the potential client cares the most about. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how you go about, as a person who, formerly at an agency responding to RFPs, now actually writing RFPs for agencies. How do you go about creating an RFP that is that's effective and that gets you the best possible responses?
I love that question so much because I did so much new business in my previous life, and you would get RFPs that there weren't clear objectives or goals, what was required, the work product that was required, or what the statement of work was going to be was not very clear. And oftentimes they're not very inspirational either. So we took the RFP process very seriously because several people on my team also come from the agency side. So we went through several rounds of edits to get to a request for proposal that we thought was clear, that was concise, but that also had impact and that would get these agencies wanting to work with us too. We were not going to be your for-profit organization that has as much money as, say, some other clients might. We wanted to make sure we did this efficiently and effectively. But I think a lot of people can get behind mission and can understand that when you're helping people and when you're helping to educate about a condition that is on the rise, that's important. So it was really important to us that the RFP had meaning and human stories behind it. So a couple things we did. One, we edited and edited and edited again, right? We made sure we were leading with human stories and telling the stories of people in our community. We worked really hard to be very clear up front on what the ask was going to be and how we would be measuring success. And the other thing we did, which was a part of the entire process, was I formed a Marcom advisory work group, which was made up of volunteers within our organization that have strong marketing backgrounds. So I found the folks, and I know of the folks within this organization who are supporters, in many cases, parents of people with type 1 diabetes who had really strong marketing backgrounds. And I leveraged them not only to help with the RFP development, but through the selection and to go through all the research with us. That played a hugely critical role because I think they help bring the human element to that RFP. And we had really strong responses. Siegel and Gale obviously won, but I would think that all of the responses we got indicated that that was a strong RFP because I really think people got what we were looking for when we had those presentations and proposals.
What I think a lot of folks writing RFPs fail to realize, especially if they don't have an agency background, is that in the process of writing an RFP, the RFP you create is as much an ad for you to try and attract the best possible talent as it is, kind of telling them what they need to do in order to attract your attention. And ultimately, if you don't write a good RFP, you're going to attract responses from people who don't have a lot else going on, and they're just throwing stuff at the wall trying to see what sticks. If you write an amazing RFP, an RFP that makes them excited to work with you, an RFP that demonstrates, I'm a good client, I know what I want, and I can articulate clearly what I want, you're going to attract much better agencies than if you're writing a really kind of ill-conceived and poorly constructed RFP. And I love that you understand that. Now, as we mentioned, you made the move from agency life and doing a lot of, commercial work to now being in the nonprofit sector. What motivated that for you? What made you, kind of make the decision to go into nonprofits?
Well, I will tell you, it sounds like, Jackson, you looked at my background. I probably worked in every industry and several CPG clients, all of which were extremely rewarding. And I think what's really nice about that and the background I had is, I also worked on experiential marketing. I worked on shopper marketing. So I think it gave me a good overview of the various ways you can market a product or a service, right? Beyond traditional advertising or even digital channels. So that was all wonderful experience. But I started to think after COVID, there was just a time where it came to me and I said, there were a couple things that happened. I really wanted to have some client side experience. I had been in the agency world my entire career, and I think it was something that I personally felt I was lacking, and I really wanted to have that experience and understand how that engine worked. So client side experience was very important to me. But I mentioned at the beginning when we were chatting, I was here raising two teenage boys. And, I wanted to do something that was really meaningful to me and something that I cared about. And this opportunity came along, and it was the best of both worlds. It was clear that the organization was looking for a restructure of their marketing department. And I knew how to do that because I had run offices before. They needed a strong marketing strategy, and I think they needed somebody that cared. And to me, I looked at the job description and I went, this is what I'm looking for. So I'm just thrilled that they picked me in the process.
That's amazing. Now, I believe that before coming on, you were at VMLY&R, which later merged, I think, with Wunderman Thompson, right? Kind of big,
Yes.
high-powered creative agency. I'm curious. I'm curious if you could just tell us a little bit about that life. We have kind of all kinds of in our audience. We have CMOs, but we also have marketers who aspire to be CMOs or are planning out their career. Maybe they're considering going into agency life. Tell us a little bit about what that's, the kind of good, the bad, and the ugly of, working at a kind of big name agency like that.
And it's interesting because I had worked for a small company that was purchased by WPP, and then so WPP is the holding company for VML, Y&R, and Ogilvy. I'd been part of Ogilvy as well. So I'd worked for a small agency and then became part of the WPP holding company. In terms of the good, I mean, I was exposed to the smartest, most interesting, most creative people. I often tell my friends who are still on the agency side, I sometimes think they have a fear about leaving agency to go client side. I think they have a belief, and Jackson, you might hear this from your friends too, that, oh, it might not be as interesting or as exciting, or it might not be as creative, or I don't know if I can do that, right? I think there's also this view that you've always been agency side. I don't know if I have what it takes to do that. And what I tell my friends agency side, the training you get at an agency is like no other. I mean, I feel like, as I said, you're exposed to the smartest people in marketing, but I also think there's a rigor to the work that you don't find everywhere. I knew early on the importance of data and analytics, and using data and analytics to not only help me with my future plans, but actually to make changes on a dime in particular campaigns and programs. I knew that years ago. I knew I was exposed to things like I told you, I worked a lot on experiential marketing, and you could see how events and interacting with people face to face can have such an impact for a brand, especially for a brand that you need to experience through taste or through driving or whatever it might be. So what I just love about the agency is I'd say the people and the process are like none other. So I tell people sometimes when they're looking, I have other friends who've looked at nonprofits, and oftentimes when they're going through the interview process say, oh, but you don't have nonprofit experience. But my experience has been that on the agency side, you have the marketing expertise, you have the management expertise, you have the technical expertise, you know about data, and you also know about stakeholder management. I worked at WPP. We had to stakeholder management and making sure that we were reporting to our regional leads or to WPP. That was part of our role. And I have very similar responsibilities when it comes to reporting up to our board of directors. So there's a lot of things that work from the agency side in the nonprofit world too.
I was going to say, I think that rigor is a tremendous piece of the puzzle. This isn't the case everywhere client side, but frequently folks who've only ever been client side, I've noticed, end up hitting a point of frustration in their careers where they're kind of, left out of important conversations and left at the kids' table a little bit when it comes to, their organizations, because they don't have that kind of muscle of having regularly had to defend their work and decision making through data. and that makes it harder for them to get stakeholder buy-in, and so they're left out of some of the important decision-making processes. That's not the case in every, some large organizations. We've had a conversation actually with a couple of CMOs who came up through the Salesforce organization, which has a fantastic internal marketing team that's very data driven. But that's not the case at every organization. And I'd encourage anyone in our audience who has not had the opportunity to be in an agency, for a rotation, to take the opportunity to spend a few years in an agency and really learn that rigor. That's a fantastic point.
I tell every young person I meet, I'm telling you, because, people, I network with young people and they're looking for roles, and I tell them, do a stint at an agency. You'll learn so much in a short period of time. You'll work your tail off like you've never worked before in your life, but it's going to really be great for you. The bad are the things we all know, right? When you're part of a holding company, the numbers are, rule the day, and you need to make sure that the profitability is where it needs to be. And yet we are a people business, and people are expensive, and clients have procurement groups, and they're often looking to cut costs. So that's just a challenge that we all face. So it's that constant, we were talking earlier about new business, that constant drum of pitching new business. And when you're doing that, you're using your best talent, which might mean you're taking the eye off the ball on your other client. It's a difficult world. And it's hard when profitability is so important, especially at a holding company. And I hope that can change, because what is the most important thing as an agent at an agency is the people, and that often requires sometimes a high price tag to get the best people.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you've touched a bit on also the question of work-life balance, right? You mentioned you have two boys. I'm a parent myself. I also have two sons, and certainly I think agency life comes with a sort of always on demand that is that I think if you don't figure out how to manage that, and you don't have an agency that's like able to work with you, I think it can be difficult for some people to maintain, for a whole career, right? If they don't sort of find the right organization for them and for their lifestyle needs.
I agree. I'll tell you though, my whole career was at agency, and I will say I had wonderful bosses. I had really wonderful bosses over the years, one of which I'm still in touch with and lives in my hometown, a woman, a mother. I also found ways to just make sure I could carve out time, right? Meetings starting at a certain time, making sure I was blocking out times to go to whatever the play was. And I will say, I just think I was very fortunate to have partners, leaders, colleagues who were respectful of that. And in many cases, were going through the same thing as well.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a note in there also for leaders, to sort of respect that your people need to have the opportunity to have a life, and that part of adequately planning out projects and teams is making sure that you're allowing for, people to live their life as well as, meet deadlines.
Just one thing I was going to say on that is trust is so important too. I trust my team. I think I had leaders who trusted me. So I know that when they need to take that time, they can and should and do, because I also know they're going to get the job done at a time when they're able to get the job done. So I think that trust piece is so important as well.
Do you have a favorite campaign you worked on, kind of in agency life? Are there any campaigns that stand out that you really, really love?
It's so interesting because it's not something many people will have heard of, but I think it actually goes back to why mission work was important to me as well, and where I got excited about branding too. There's an organization in Connecticut called Grace Farms, and they were actually focused, interestingly enough, on human slavery. They had different pillars of areas that they were interested in, and one of those areas where they really invested a lot was in human trafficking and human slavery. And we did a rebrand campaign for them called Unchained that was just beautiful. And the image we used was a hummingbird, because when a hummingbird is set free, that's when their colors come out. And it was a small campaign, but it was actually so beautifully done, and we won some awards for it. But it had a lot of meaning to me because we used stories from survivors, and the work itself was so beautiful. And I think it was my first taste of mission oriented work that I know could have a huge impact. So although it was small, it had a lot of meaning to me, and the creative and the storytelling around it was really high impact.
That's fantastic. One thing I think a lot about with nonprofits and mission driven work more broadly is just trust. And what are the things that you're doing in order to, build trust with your donors, with your volunteers, with the community more broadly? And kind of on that point, there's an organization, you might be familiar with them. They're big in particular in the human trafficking kind of nonprofit space, called Operation Underground Railroad. And they've had this kind of ongoing PR crisis with it turns out that their founder was not a great guy and had a pretty sketchy checkered past. And when I see things like that happen, it kind of breaks my heart, because I think it creates frequently like trust issues for other potential donors in the space. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts as a marketer for how you can communicate what your organization is doing in such a way that it can give donors a high degree of confidence that they're putting their money in the best possible place, and that they really kind of know who it is that they're contributing to.
So I told you earlier on, we're the leading research and advocacy organization when it comes to type 1 diabetes. So I think we are very well respected. We're a well respected voice. So I think the way we are building that trust regularly, and you know this better than anyone, we have to use our channels, particularly our social channels, differently depending on who the audience is. But I think we're doing a really good job of using our social channels to build that trust, and to build that trust based on audience. So we, I think, have gotten much better in the last few years at telling our story and talking about the incredible work we're doing from a research standpoint and the incredible work we're doing from an advocacy standpoint, but in a human way that people can relate to. I'll give you an example. We had been involved from the beginning at funding research associated with a drug that has recently gone to market called Tzield. Tzield is a disease-modifying therapy, which means if you take the drug, and I'll say it as simply as possible, if you qualify for the drug and take it, it can almost give you the gift of time where you do not have to take insulin. The FDA approved it for 2 years to not have to take insulin. Amazing. The way we told that story about our involvement was just that, telling human stories, people who had taken Tzield and what that meant. What did that mean? So in the past, we might have talked about, we funded the researchers, which we still do. Here are the researchers we funded. Here's how much we funded. Here's what the name for the drug was at the time. But instead, what we did when the drug was approved is we really tried to lead from a storytelling standpoint, because that helped a broader audience understand what Tzield was. And we talked to people, patients and parents of patients, and what that meant. It meant 2 years of my child not having to take insulin. So that meant, 720 nights that weren't sleepless nights. Those things resonate with people. So those human storytelling moments, I think, are a way that we're building trust, we're building authenticity, but also helping to explain our involvement in these stories.
I love that. Well, and I like that the way you're going about doing this is not by centering kind of one spokesperson or one kind of character in the story. You have a really broad base of people whose stories you're telling in an organic way. And the reason I like that is because the specific kind of bad example I brought up of Operation Underground Railroad was entirely built around one guy who was put up like really prominently over and over again. And when it turned out that he was actually kind of doing some terrible things, he ended up, bringing the entire organization down because he's like one point of failure in an organization that otherwise, I assume, was doing probably a lot of good. But you have this really broad base. You're telling stories that people can believe as well, because it's sort of coming from like real normal people, and it's not like, I don't know, an anonymous press release just coming from the organization. It's stories that are coming from a broad base of people. I love that. What How are you going about actually distributing this? Is this like largely social media based? Are you buying television ads? Like, kind of what's your channel strategy here?
Yeah, we are a nonprofit, and it's real. So, and what's very important to our constituents, our donors, that they want to make sure that our money, the money we raise, is going toward mission. So I work within a somewhat conservative budget, and I know I've listened to some of your other podcasts before. I know other people that have this experience as well. We do have incredible owned channels, right? So we have incredible followers on our owned channels. So we are obviously on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, more recently on TikTok. So the point I was making earlier, obviously we're talking to audiences differently depending on the channel. A robust email marketing strategy. People really use our website and our web content for information. We're often a first stop when somebody is first diagnosed, but there are so many other ways we're getting out there. So we were not investing heavily in paid media before I got here. Back to the data, we have proven that it works. Paid media is helping us reach a broader audience. I can show our donors, our volunteers, that we're deepening engagement and support. And if we deepen engagement and support through paid media efforts, we're going to drive our mission forward faster. So yes, we have been doing more in TV, obviously significant paid digital, SEO, SEM, making sure that we're sort of rising to the top when people are either searching about type 1 diabetes or our organization. We also have a lot of partnerships that are important to us. Partnerships, I'll give you an example. There's an organization called TCOYD, which is called Taking Care of Your Diabetes. And they happen to resonate with the adult type 1 diabetes population, whereas we were an organization where people thought we were just for kids. So when we partner with an organization like TCOYD and do partner video content that they'll share on their channels, that's a great way for us to get the word out about what we're doing as well. So it's really across the board, from a partnership standpoint, from a word of mouth, engaging our volunteers standpoint, paid media, owned channels, paid, owned, and earned in as efficient and effective way as we can.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm curious, when it comes to partnerships. I'm a huge fan of, even for for-profit, organizations, like partnerships where there's, not necessarily even any money changing hands, just brands kind of helping each other out. So I worked at a consumer electronics company, a company called Jaybird, that was later purchased by Logitech. They made like Bluetooth headphones for kind of adventure, right? And they partnered closely with Red Bull, with GoPro, with Petzl, with a number of kind of with Cotopaxi, a number of kind of adventure forward brands. Some of those partnerships involved, sort of paying for exposure, or paying to be included, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them were genuinely just building inroads and relationships in these organizations, and then cross-pollinating content, either sharing each other's content or creating content which featured this kind of, family of brands that didn't have any commercial ties, but had the same kind of user demographic and the same lifestyle they were serving. And I think that's something that's oftentimes overlooked by marketers, is the power of just saying, hey, build some good relationships, make friends at kind of, organizations that have a related brand, and then see how you can help each other out. And I think that is so often overlooked as an opportunity as a marketer.
It is. Obviously, we have paid partnerships, areas where we're paying if we see a benefit and a return on investment for our mission. but then partners who obviously are paying us as well as part of our corporate development strategy. But we do have those partnerships that where no money is exchanged, and those are important, where we are here for the type 1 diabetes community, and we're sharing about ways that we can support the type 1 diabetes community. I think of an organization called Blue Circle Health, which is just helping folks right now in Florida, help them understand where they can get type 1 diabetes education awareness in their state. And we're helping to support them because we think what they're doing is really strong. But, another way is through celebrity. A lot of, we do not have big fees for celebrities. And, a lot of the celebrities we work with are working with us out of the goodness of their heart. They are tied to this mission. They care about this mission, and they've done incredible work for us. I think of one of our huge events, and we'll have it next July, is called Children's Congress, where we have about 300 or so ambassadors from around the country, children who actually come to DC and meet with their local representatives to tell them why insulin affordability is important and why they should be supporting the special diabetes program, federal funding for diabetes. Celebrities are a big part of that event, and many of them, if not all of the ones at Children's Congress, participated out of the goodness of their heart because this mission is close to them, and that's important. That stage that they have and the way they can help amplify this mission and help drive towards cures is really important.
I'm curious if there's anything you've learned in this role at Breakthrough T1D that you wish you would have known earlier in your career. Are there any kind of lessons stepping into this role that you wish you could have passed on to a younger you?
Well, I will say I think I did learn it in my previous career, but I've realized in this role how important relationships are. Relationships are so important. And that builds trust, right? And when you build trust is when we're getting work done and work that has meaning. So I think the relationships I've built here with our constituents has been really important because I think they trust me that even though I do not have a personal connection to type 1 diabetes, I did not have a direct personal connection to type 1 diabetes, I think they trust me and understand that I really care about this, and I care about them and their families. So I think that relationships are a key part of all this. And then I'll go back to the data. I needed data, not only to your point, Jackson, to think about what was the best way for us to look at our organization and what would resonate. I needed data to convince our most important supporters that this was the right decision. Data was needed because this change could not be done based on opinion. So I think the combination of relationship building and leveraging data are two important lessons when it comes to marketing.
What do you think, shifting gears a little bit, what do you think is the most important trend in marketing today?
Well, I'm sure a lot of folks will say AI, and we have seen the power of AI, certainly from a content standpoint. We have heavy writing needs at this organization. I talked a lot about the research that we do. And you can see the role AI can play in helping, right? In helping to get work done. But the one thing I will tell you is that's never going to take away, in my world, in this world, from the human component, right? We need to make sure that the work is right and accurate. So I think that's important. I think user-generated content has been really interesting for us, right? We talked a little bit about celebrity, but I would say the power of these micro influencers and user-generated content to sort of build awareness and to bring folks into our organization has been something that I've seen help our organization tremendously. And I think a lot of brands are seeing how it's helping move the needle for them as well.
Pam, how do you feel about a lightning round?
I feel good.
First off, what do you think is the most important trait a CMO needs to have?
I think things change on a dime. And flexibility is key.
What career advice do you have for aspiring CMOs?
If you can get agency experience and client side experience, I think that's a win.
If you could market any brand other than Breakthrough T1D, which would it be?
Oh gosh, that is a tough question. I was going to say I was going to say Breakthrough T1D, and I'm so happy to be doing it. I'll tell you, I got an Apple Watch Sunday. It's the best thing. It is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I was living on a Fitbit before, so maybe I'd say the Apple Watch, although they're doing a pretty good job.
Good choice. What's your favorite marketing book?
I'm reading it right now, and I'm looking over at my desk to make sure I get the title right. It's called Legacy, and it is a book a colleague of mine just gave me. It's about I believe, a rugby team in New Zealand and the importance of leadership.
Oh, the All Blacks?
Yes. And I just started reading it. So I'm going to say that's my favorite because I just started reading it. But you can see how the leadership around that team, how that can relate to managing a team and leading a team.
Okay. I played a little rugby in high school. I'll have to look the book up. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Legacy. I'm looking at it on my desk right now.
I'll check it out. Where outside of marketing do you look for inspiration?
For my kids, I watch. It is amazing to me how much my son is going to college on Sunday. So this is on my brain, but he's going to be a freshman. This is on my brain right now. I'm really impressed with him, what he can do and how adept they are at technology and how much they can get done in a very short period of time. And really how he's taken ownership of what he needs to accomplish at school, whether it was, forming his schedule, his living arrangements. I take inspiration from young people because they really are impressive, and we need to give them a lot of credit because I think we get nervous about technology sometimes, but I watch them and see what they're able to accomplish, and it's really quite impressive.
What is your favorite marketing campaign of all time?
Oh, I don't know if I could. Well, was it 1984? Was it I'm going to bring up Apple or
that has to be the 1984 ad has to be the number one favorite ad we have mentioned on this podcast as CMO's favorite campaign. It is an all-time classic. Really? Good answer.
It is inspiring. It is amazing. Yeah. So I'd say that.
What is your favorite piece of content you've consumed recently? It could be a TV show, could be a book, could be a movie, could be a podcast, could be an album. I just started watching The Bear is it on Hulu? And it is amazing. I'm only on season 1, episode 3. But the reason I like it, because I know people who've worked in restaurants before. And what I think that show does an incredible job of doing, which I think we can all learn from a marketing standpoint, you sort of sense the chaos of working in the restaurant industry from that show. It's so clear how chaotic that world is from that show. Somehow that it just exudes off the television. So I've enjoyed that. Is there anything we didn't discuss, Pam, that we should have? I will just say, I'll end with this. This has been the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my career, this rebrand. I feel really, really proud of it. But I think the thing I'm most proud of is what I told you is how we've wanted to bring people along for the ride. And I think what I'm so proud of is we involved Jim Lurie in the process early. Jim Lurie is the son of Carol Lurie, who was one of the founders of the organization. And I think Jim wouldn't be upset if he heard me say, I don't know if he was on board with this to begin with. I think everything we talked about, the process, the data, the care that we put into this. So I think that's been probably one of the highlights of all of this. We'll leave it there. Pam Morrisroe, thank you so much for joining us on the Top CMO podcast.
Thanks, Jackson. It was great talking to you.
This amazing episode was brought to you by Top Thought Leader. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe.